Showering together was originally a prospect brought up by both Keith and Nettie, but the idea of being honorable to their mother was also the comfortable choice, each taking turns in the shower, always separated while respecting each other to get clothed out of each other's sight despite their history of skinny dipping with their friends. Once they were finished, Nettie insisted on checking Keith's slightly injured feet for any signs of infection before getting dressed for school. Keith even helped comb Nettie's synthetic hair, making sure every strand was in place once privacy wasn't an issue. The only secret they had for now was the fact that they weren't actually siblings, but they certainly were family in a sense. As they walked out of the house, Keith sported his favorite blue jeans and skateboarder t-shirt, along with his trusty backpack that he had cherished since 5th grade. On the other hand, Nettie was decked out in all brand new clothes. Blue jeans, a logoed Captain Crunch t-shirt adorned with a picture of a submarine exploring the wreckage of the Titanic, and her shoes, which she almost lost at Dean's house. She clung tightly to her backpack as they made their way down the 2-block walk to school. As they walked out of the house, Keith sported his favorite blue jeans and skateboarder t-shirt, along with his trusty backpack that he had cherished since 5th grade. On the other hand, Nettie was decked out in all brand new clothes. Blue jeans, a logoed Captain Crunch t-shirt adorned with a picture of a submarine exploring the wreckage of the Titanic, and her shoes, which she almost lost at Dean's house. She clung tightly to her backpack as they made their way down the 2-block walk to school. "What's our class schedule today?" Keith asked, pulling out his phone to check the app. Nettie smiled and leaned into him as they walked. "First period is art with Mr. Greenboyle," she listed off on her fingers. "Then English with Mrs. Torrance, algebra with Mr. Fox for 3rd period, and finally physical education with Mr. Tabor," she recited confidently. Together, they entered the bustling hallways of their school and maneuvered through throngs of students trying to find their classes. The bustling school hallways were alive with the sounds of students chatting, screaming, and shouting. Amidst the chaos, Keith and Nettie struggled to navigate their way through the crowd, hand in hand. They finally arrived at their designated classroom, where Keith quickly identified the matching number on his phone. With a sense of relief, they stepped inside to find the room sparsely populated, save for a few items already claimed by other students. Keith and Nettie staked their claim on 2 empty chairs and settled in. "How much charge do you have?" Keith asked Nettie. 94, she replied confidently. "I'm good for 18 hours easily." Satisfied with her response, Keith motioned towards the door. "We still have another 15 minutes before class starts," he commented as they made their way towards the science wing. As they walked down a dead-end hallway, the overwhelming noise of the main hallway faded into a distant murmur. Finally reaching their destination, Keith and Nettie were greeted by Jack's voice. They pushed past a group of running students to find Jack and Candace sitting at the end of the hallway underneath a corkboard covered in old flyers from the previous year. "Plop down," Jack exclaimed. "Welcome to our newly christened hangout spot for the bare-naked besties," he joked, referencing their recent night together. "Candace, didn't recognize you with clothes on?" Keith quipped. "Hilarious," Candace retorted playfully as she flicked Keith off. She was dressed in black pants, a red and black striped shirt, and rose-colored glasses, her body once again concealed under baggy clothing. Jack's words hung heavy in the air, his lack of shame evident as he openly discussed his fascination with Keith's ex-girlfriend in front of his new girlfriend Candace. Nettie and Keith observed their interaction closely, trying to gauge Candace's reaction to Jack's bold statement. Nettie looked down at Keith's backpack and asked if he had the AR glasses. As they were all squeezed together in the dark hallway, Keith had to lean forward to retrieve them. With a flick of a zipper, he handed Nettie the glasses and instructed her to open the AR Mesh Interact app and select the file titled Angelica by Jack. As she blinked 3 times, Nettie's eyes widened in shock as she saw Angelica standing in the hallway through the lenses of the AR glasses. She leaned forward for a better look before taking them off with a nod of approval. "Fair assessment," Nettie said, her tone still tinged with surprise. She turned to Keith and Candace. "So, are you both okay with this?" Candace shrugged nonchalantly. "I mean, as long as it's considered art, I guess. It wasn't exactly my first choice for a Christmas gift," Keith admitted. "But it is impressive how well Jack can recreate people just from memory or photos." Nettie nodded slowly, her brow raised in contemplation. "It's definitely a unique talent. So, Jack exclaimed, his voice eager with anticipation. How close was I? He leaned forward in excitement, eyes fixed on Nettie, who sat across from him on the hallway floor. Nettie smiled and shook her head, a hint of amusement dancing in her expression. Fairly close, she replied calmly, her gaze sweeping over the three friends gathered together in the rarely used hallway. Jack's fingers twitched with impatience as he waited for more details. What did I miss? He asked eagerly. Well, Nettie began, crossing her legs and placing her hands in her lap. You were missing a few details, but you couldn't have known. For example, she has a small birthmark on her inner thigh. She paused for effect before continuing, but I doubt even Dean or Chris have noticed it. They're too busy admiring the rest of her. Candace's eyes widened at this new information, and she reached out to grab Keith's AR glasses. Let me see, she exclaimed, leaning forward eagerly. Jack tapped Candace's back to stop her from reaching out over the empty expanse of hall. No need to use his, he said casually as he pulled out his own glasses from his bag. With a few quick taps, he activated the file for her and Keith while Nettie and Candace watched in awe as an invisible version of the hallway appeared before them. After taking in the sight, Candace let out a disappointed scoff. Yeah, she said with a sneer. She's still ugly even like that. Keith, you really wanted to tap that? Keith shook his head in confusion. Tap on what? He asked innocently. Nettie chuckled at their friend's lack of understanding. It's okay to be innocent, she reminded them gently. She's right, Jack agreed, joining in on the laughter. But if we're going to be spending time in my pool as an after-school hangout spot, I think we should teach Keith a thing or two about tapping. And no, it's not a dance move, he added playfully. Nettie smiled and leaned back until her head made contact with the brick wall behind her. She could hear Jack and Candace continuing to tease Keith, their voices filled with humor. I'm okay with hanging out in your backyard again, Nettie said, breaking into their banter. But I also think we could use some more hangout spots. Has anyone heard of that karaoke bar down on Green Street? Candace shook her head, a sheepish grin on her face. I mostly live under a rock and binge watch my shows. Hate to break it to you, Jack interjected, but we can't go into any bars until we're 21. The friends fell into a comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the future and their upcoming adventures together. The sound of laughter echoed through the hallway, a reminder of the strong bond they shared as friends. Keith, feeling increasingly perplexed, couldn't quite pinpoint the reason why. Nettie had never ventured beyond their own neighborhood as far as he knew. He wondered if she had looked it up on digimaps or absorbed the information from her home, which seemed to be where her brain was truly alive. Nettie flashed a bright smile at the group huddled in their dark corner of the school. Her eyes scanned over them before she spoke. There's a karaoke bar nearby with a separate section for adults, and minors are allowed as long as they stay away from the actual bar. We should go there. It'll be so much fun. Nettie's enthusiasm was contagious as she pushed the idea forward. Oh, shit, Jack exclaimed, caught off guard. Okay. Yeah, let's do it. Candace beamed and high-fived her boyfriend. Jack held onto her fingers tightly, shaking her arm with excitement. I'm not singing, though, Candace admitted with a playful pout, but I'll happily watch you all. I've never tried singing before, Keith confessed nervously. I'll give it a try if you do, Nettie challenged Jack. Fuck yeah, girl, Jack agreed enthusiastically. Wait, are we still planning on getting naked, though? Candace leaned forward, returning Jack his glasses with raised eyebrows and an eager smile. Keith winced and sucked in air through his teeth. You can't do that at a karaoke bar. Nettie chuckled briefly while Jack groaned audibly. She means my pool, don't worry, Nettie said. What about your dad? Keith asked. The sound of Keith's innocent question hung in the air as Jack, Candace, and Nettie all held their breaths. They knew what was coming next, and with a sense of camaraderie they spoke in unison. No sex in the pool. It was Larry Lillard's mantra, the only rule for their backyard parties. Even though they were tucked away in a dark hallway, their synchronized outburst caught the attention of several passing students who stopped to watch them with amusement. But it didn't faze the four friends as they laughed and continued on their way to class. As the bell rang, signaling the start of the school day, Keith helped Nettie up from her seat, and they headed off to their respective classes. Jack hugged Candace goodbye, making plans to meet up at lunch later on. Keith gathered his AR glasses and neatly placed them back into his backpack before helping Nettie with hers. Well, off to woodshop for me, Jack announced with a grin. PE for me, Candace chimed in. I'm just glad I have someone who doesn't mind how sweaty and smelly I get for the rest of the day. And art for us, Keith added. Candace couldn't help but smile at the fact that Keith and Nettie had landed the same first period class together. She reminded them not to stick together too obviously or people would start to catch on. Keith and Nettie nodded in agreement, but little did they know that Nettie had arranged for them to have all their classes together. This thought made Keith slightly nervous, so he quickly ushered Nettie down the main hallways towards their classroom. Upon entering the room, they noticed that most of the desks were already taken. Nettie's brow furrowed as she saw their books discarded on the floor next to Billy and Marissa's smug faces. Mr. Greenboyle glanced at the mess on the floor, but decided to ignore it and continue with the lesson. Keith and Nettie quickly picked up their books and took their seats in the back of the classroom where they could hardly see the board or what Greenboyle was teaching. Keith let out a heavy sigh as he looked at the new students who had transferred to their school. I can't believe they ended up here, he muttered. Art, of all things. It's such an easy subject, but now they have the misfortune of being in our class. Greenboyle tapped his drawing tablet impatiently, signaling for the class to quiet down. Class is about to start, so let's try to keep the talking to a minimum today. We have a lot to cover. Nettie blinked and scooted closer to Keith at the back art table, her shoulders shrugging in resignation. Greenboyle couldn't help but notice the look on Nettie's face. Do you have a problem with that, miss? He glanced down at his list of students. Clarence? At the sound of her last name, another girl in the class perked up. Sir? I'm Nettie Cameron, Nettie corrected him. Ah, the Cameron siblings. I must say I didn't expect you two to be so close, Greenboyle remarked with a chuckle. Neither Nettie nor Keith reacted to his comment. Instead, Nettie calmly pointed her stylus toward the ceiling. The bell hasn't rung yet, she stated matter-of-factly. That's why we were still talking. Attention to detail, Greenboyle said with a smile. That can come in handy in art. He scanned the classroom for any signs of amusement, but only received blank stares from his students. Sighing, he waited until the bell finally rang before starting his lesson. The room hummed with excitement as the students eagerly awaited their first assignment on the school-provided tablets. The light from the screens cast a glow on their faces, highlighting their anticipation. The teacher's voice cut through the chatter, bringing their attention to the front of the room. Okay, everyone. These tablets are nifty little things. Not only can you take notes, read textbooks, and surf the internet, but you can also draw, create files, and receive homework. The mention of homework elicited boos and groans from some of the students. I want you all to create a new file titled Period 1 Art, and within that folder make a blank template titled Assignment 1. Your task is to draw whatever comes to mind. Just be sure to include your name in the top right corner and feel free to turn the tablet however you'd like. I simply want to see your skills and gauge your artistic abilities, the teacher instructed. Some students started chatting among themselves while others immediately got to work. Keith let out a sigh. I think I'll just stick with a basic stick figure. Nettie smiled at him and quickly followed the teacher's instructions, writing her name in the designated spot before tapping her chin thoughtfully. I'm not sure what I should draw. I keep thinking about Jack's talent with those AR glasses, she mused, as she cast a glare towards a group of students who had kicked their bags out of their chairs and stolen their seats. Keith furrowed his brow and looked around confusedly. I don't understand. Nettie shook her head with a smile. Just a passing thought. I probably shouldn't act on it, though, especially on my first day of school. With that, she began dragging her stylus across the screen, creating a masterpiece in digital form. Keith followed suit, enjoying the freedom of expression on his new tablet. As the final minutes of the period ticked away, Keith poured his heart and soul into his drawing. His fingers flew across the screen of his tablet, bringing to life an anime character named Naruto with every stroke. Despite a few flaws here and there, Keith couldn't help but feel proud of his creation as he flipped the tablet around to show Nettie. Her eyes widened in confusion as she studied the drawing. Who is it? She asked. It's Naruto, Keith exclaimed. It's from my favorite anime. Curious, Nettie then showed Keith a picture on her own tablet. It was a black and white photograph that looked like it had been taken by a professional photographer. In the image, Keith could be seen skating effortlessly on a skateboard. "Wow, that's amazing," Keith whispered in awe. Before he could fully take in the compliment, their teacher, Mr. Greenboyle, appeared next to them and snatched the tablet out of Keith's hand. "That's an instant F on your very first assignment, Nettie," Greenboyle announced coldly. "Congratulations." Nettie and Keith were both stunned by this sudden turn of events. "Why?" Keith protested. "That's not fair." But Greenboyle simply shook his head. "I know AI-generated art when I see it," he accused. "What site did you get it off of? Google?" The two teens exchanged bewildered glances before turning back to their teacher with dismay. It seemed their hard work and creativity had been brushed aside as a fraud. Nettie's voice trembled as she spoke. "I didn't go to a site." "You're just that good?" Greenboyle scoffed. He pointed to the smartboard. "Let's watch you paint a Rembrandt for the class." Without hesitation, Nettie rose from her seat and made her way to the front of the classroom. She picked up a stylus and began sketching on the smartboard, creating a stunning image of a nude boy holding a sign that read, "I'm just a bully." As she filled in the details and shadows, Billy recognized the face and squirmed uncomfortably in his seat. "That's enough!" Greenboyle barked. "I'm not finished," Nettie replied defiantly. "Yes, you are," the teacher insisted. "Do you believe me now?" Nettie asked, a hint of smugness in her voice. Greenboyle sighed, his anger subsiding. "Yes, but you can't draw things like that in my classroom. It's rude and insulting." Nettie shrugged nonchalantly and returned to her seat next to Keith. They watched as Greenboyle erased the image from the board. "Nice job," Keith whispered. "I think you're too advanced for this class, Nettie," Greenboyle continued, his tone softening. "And we've had issues at this school with students sharing inappropriate images on social media. From now on, only use your talents for artistic purposes." Nettie couldn't help but ask about her failing grade. "I can admit when I'm wrong, as long as you can too," Greenboyle admitted. "But understand that it is wrong to use your skills to put down your classmates." Nettie stood with her hands on her slender hips, leaning forward as if about to push a point. Her gaze was sharp, piercing through the air as she addressed the teacher. Keith watched in amazement as Nettie continued. "Throwing our books onto the floor and making you sit somewhere else like what Billy did? You mean putting down students in such a memorable way that would affect your ability to be lazy rather than actually enforce the rules no matter what level of strife they cause?" The teacher, Greenboyle, grumbled and pointed at Nettie. The tension in the classroom was palpable. "I'm about ready to start enforcing some rules if you don't sit back down," he growled. His finger remained pointed towards an empty chair next to Keith's, but Nettie refused to back down. "What he's doing is improper treatment based not on bias but rather comfortability," she told Keith. "It's wrong and he knows it." Keith could feel his heart rate increasing as he watched the exchange between his sister and the teacher. Without hesitation, he got up from his chair and guided Nettie back to sit with him. She blinked, seemingly surprised by his actions. Keith leaned in and whispered into her ear. "The world should be black and white, but it isn't," he said softly. "You are right, but it's going to be hard to restart the whole system as you see it. I might not know much about relationships, but I do know a lot about getting into trouble." As they settled back into their seats, Keith couldn't help but feel a sense of pride for standing up for his sister's beliefs. Despite the chaos that seemed to surround them on a daily basis, at least they had each other's backs. "I shouldn't get into any trouble," Nettie whispered back as she sat down next to him. They both watched as the teacher paced while shaking with anger toward the two of them, Nettie mostly. "Barring any further disruptions from students who have no business being in my class, we will review your artwork and determine how much guidance you require based on your level of skill." Keith's grip tightened around Nettie's hand under the desk, silently willing her to remain calm and avoid any more confrontations with the volatile first-period teacher. As the bell rang and class began, Nettie couldn't help but feel nervous about what was to come. The clock struck noon, signaling lunchtime for the students in Keith's math class. He eagerly left his books on his desk and joined the line of hungry students making their way to the cafeteria. Nettie walked behind him, mimicking his choices as she filled her tray with food. As they reached the condiment station, Nettie watched as Marissa squeezed herself between Keith and Nettie to grab the salt shaker. Marissa seemed to have a small group of admirers surrounding her, evident by the distant giggles that could be heard. Nettie attempted to reach for the salt in the same manner as Keith, but when she turned it over, the lid was nowhere to be found. A mischievous glint in Marissa's eye gave away her actions as the salt poured onto Nettie's fries like a white avalanche. The nearby students erupted in laughter, clearly in on the prank. "Don't be so salty," Marissa yelled over her shoulder as she strutted back to her group of followers. The laughter continued as the lunch lady paid no mind to the commotion. Keith shook his head at them and turned to apologize to Nettie. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "It's not your fault." "I think this may be retaliation for what happened in art class this morning," Nettie replied. "You're holding up the line?" the lunch lady scolded. "Relax," Keith retorted. "That girl purposely unscrewed the salt on my sister's plate. She'll need a whole new tray." "She should have been paying attention," the lunch lady huffed. Nettie placed her ruined tray on top of the translucent divider and walked away with Keith, leaving behind an exasperated lunch lady. As they walked out of the cafeteria, Nettie couldn't help but notice how many staff members seemed aware of what was going on, yet chose not to enforce the school rules in order to maintain the flow of daily life. She couldn't help but wonder if this was a common occurrence outside of school walls as well. Does the staff always allow behavior like this to continue based on the effort it would take to correct the actions? Nettie wondered as she trailed Keith out of the lunch line. "I try to stay out of real life as much as possible," Keith said as Nettie followed him to one of the booths near the wall where Jack and Candace were already waiting for them. Candace's piercing voice cut through the chatter of the cafeteria as she asked, "Where's your food?" Nettie hesitated before replying, her words laced with a mixture of amusement and annoyance. "I was tricked by Candace into dumping the salt shaker onto my tray," she said with a wry smile. "But I wasn't hungry anyway, so at least I saved some money." Jack couldn't help but chime in, his blunt nature on full display. "That bitch," he blurted out unapologetically. In an act of kindness, he pushed some of his corn over to Keith's tray before sliding it towards Nettie. Meanwhile, Candace was dividing up her chicken to share with the others, but Nettie held up her hand in a stopping motion. "No, really, I'm not hungry," she insisted. "I was planning on getting some food for all of us anyways." The scents of greasy fries and grilled chicken wafted through the air as they continued their conversation amidst the bustle of the lunch rush. "Are you sure?" Jack asked, a teasing grin spreading across his face. "We all know how slender you are under those layers of clothing." Nettie's cheeks turned pink as she smiled shyly and shook her head. "No, it's fine," she reassured him. "I don't mind." Her delicate frame seemed to shrink under their scrutiny, but her confidence remained unwavering. Jack glanced over at Keith, the tension in his shoulders evident as he watched him staring across the rows of students at the main tables. The bullies were laughing and chatting about their latest cruel actions, their voices carrying easily through the crowded lunchroom. "How much homework did Mr. Fox give you guys?" Candace asked, breaking through the uncomfortable silence between Jack and Keith. "We had him last period, and he loaded us up." Keith tore his gaze away from the bullies and focused on Candace with a forced smile. "Sorry," he mumbled, digging into his corn with his fork, but as soon as he put a piece in his mouth, he spat it out onto his tray. Jack and Candace recoiled in disgust. "Holy shit. Screw the math homework, dude. What the hell was that?" Jack exclaimed with a raised lip after trying a bite of the corn himself. Nettie, Keith's sister who sat next to him, raised an eyebrow in observation. Candace followed suit and also spit out her corn into a napkin. "Jesus, this isn't corn." She muffled her words through the fabric of the napkin as she discreetly tried to expel the food. Suddenly, the school resource officer appeared and leaned over them, his expression stern. "Kids, I've been keeping an eye on you for quite some time now, and I don't know what's going on with you in the lunch line," he pointed accusingly at Keith. "Or you mocking the lunch team on their cooking. But I better see those trays cleaned." With a final warning, the officer walked away. Jack's eyebrows shot up in surprise as he watched the man leave. "What the hell was that?" he questioned aloud. "I have no idea," Nettie echoed, mirroring Jack's confusion. "I'm not eating this," Candace declared, pushing her tray away. "Me neither," Keith agreed, pushing his own tray aside. Jack let out a fake sneeze, using it as a cover to elbow the drywall next to the booth. A satisfying thud resonated through his arm as he punched out a small hole in the wall. "Binder, if you please," Jack said, smoothly digging into Candace's crumpled math homework and propping up her binder on one end to hide their misdeed. "Now, this is how we eat our food." His hand discreetly dumped the half-eaten bowl of corn into the gaping hole in the wall. There was a faint clattering noise as it fell below the first floor and disappeared behind another structure, possibly still hidden behind layers of drywall, but now in an unknown location far from their reach. The other kids couldn't help but chuckle at Jack's antics. Even Nettie cracked a smile. Keith slyly passed his tray over to Jack, who eagerly fed its contents into the wall with mock reverence. "Another offering to the food gods of Dodson High," Jack proclaimed with dramatic flair. Keith and Candace joined in on the laughter as they watched their uneaten lunches disappear into the mysterious void behind the wall.